Poor girl begs a stranger to save her mom, unaware he's a CEO who later falls in love with her. The rain poured heavily on the dimly lit streets of New York City, drenching everything in sight. Among the hurrying pedestrians, a young girl, barely 18, clutched a tattered coat around her frail frame, shivering from both cold and fear. Her large, pleading eyes scanned the crowd as she desperately reached out to passers-by, her trembling hands extended in desperation. "Please, sir. Just a little help," she murmured to an older man who barely glanced at her before walking away. Her name was Elena Carter. Life had never been kind to her. Born into poverty, she had spent her childhood taking care of her ailing mother, who had worked herself to the bone just to keep a roof over their heads. But now, that small, broken-down apartment was at risk of being lost, and worse, her mother was fighting for her life in the hospital, the medical bills piling up far beyond what Elena could ever afford. Her stomach clenched with anxiety. She had spent the entire day begging, hoping someone would have enough kindness in their heart to help her. But people barely looked at her. Then, through the blur of tears and rain, she saw him. A tall man in a tailored black suit stood by the curb, his striking presence undeniable. He exuded power and authority, his chiseled features set in a cold, unreadable expression as he scrolled through his phone. He was waiting for his car, unaware that fate was about to intervene. Summoning all her courage, Elena ran up to him, her heart pounding. "Please, sir. I need help," she cried, her voice breaking. The man barely looked up at first, as if dismissing her as just another beggar. But something in her voice, so raw, so full of desperation, made him pause. He lifted his gaze, his piercing gray eyes locking onto hers. "Help." His tone was detached, almost indifferent. "My mother, she's dying." Elena's voice cracked as she clutched her hands together in a silent plea. "The hospital. They won't treat her anymore because we can't pay. Please, I'll do anything. Just, please help her." For a moment, the man said nothing. He simply studied her, this fragile, rain-soaked girl with trembling lips and eyes full of sorrow. There was something about her. Something painfully familiar. "What's your name?" he finally asked, his deep voice cutting through the cold air. "Elena," she whispered. "Elena Carter." The name didn't mean anything to him. But the look in her eyes, pure, unfiltered desperation, stirred something deep within him. After a pause, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a thick stack of bills, handing them to her. "Take this," he said, his voice still guarded. "It should cover the hospital for now." Elena gasped, her hands trembling as she stared at the money. It was more than she had ever seen in her life. But before she could thank him, the sound of an approaching car distracted her, and she saw a sleek black limousine pull up beside him. "Wait, who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated, then simply said, "Noah Blackwood." And with that, he stepped into his car and disappeared into the city's night. Elena stood there, clutching the money to her chest, unaware that this moment had just changed her life forever. She had just begged a billionaire CEO for help. And soon, she would mean far more to him than she could ever imagine. Elena clutched the stack of crisp bills to her chest, her heart pounding in disbelief. She had expected another rejection, another cold glance. Instead, she had encountered a man who, despite his detached demeanor, had offered her enough money to give her mother a fighting chance. Noah Blackwood. The name echoed in her mind as she rushed back to St. Vincent's Hospital, her drenched shoes splashing against the pavement. The hospital's bright, sterile lights felt even harsher than before as she pushed through the doors, gasping for breath. "Elena." Nurse Patricia looked up from the reception desk, concern evident in her expression. "Did you?" "I got the money." Elena burst out, shaking from both the cold and adrenaline. "Please, let them continue treatment." The nurse blinked in shock before quickly nodding. "Wait here," she said, taking the money and rushing toward the administrative office. Elena collapsed into one of the plastic chairs, her body finally allowing exhaustion to set in. She closed her eyes, whispering silent prayers. A few minutes later, the doctor emerged. "The payment has been processed," he informed her. "Your mother will continue receiving care." "But Elena..." He hesitated, lowering his voice. She's in critical condition. We need to act fast. She might require surgery. Elena's chest tightened. Then do whatever it takes, she said firmly. Please. The doctor gave a small nod before disappearing down the hallway. Elena let out a shaky breath, unaware that, at that very moment, a certain billionaire was staring out of his penthouse window, thinking about the girl with pleading eyes. Noah Blackwood sat in his luxurious office the next morning, tapping his fingers on his desk. His assistant, Daniel, noticed his distracted demeanor and raised an eyebrow. Something on your mind, sir? Noah exhaled, leaning back in his chair. I ran into someone last night, he said slowly. A girl. She was begging for help. Daniel remained silent, knowing his boss rarely spoke about personal encounters. She reminded me of someone, Noah murmured. Someone from long ago. A flicker of emotion passed through his usually unreadable expression before he shook it off. Find out who she is, he ordered, his voice regaining its usual steel. Daniel nodded. Yes, sir. As the assistant left, Noah turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He had meant to forget about the girl. But for some reason, he couldn't. And he had a feeling that fate wasn't done with them yet. Elena sat by her mother's hospital bed, gripping her frail hand tightly. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the otherwise quiet room. Hold on, Mama, she whispered, blinking back tears. I got the money. You'll be okay. Her mother, Margaret Carter, stirred slightly, her sunken eyes fluttering open. Elena, she rasped weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm here, Elena said, forcing a smile. Margaret's eyes flickered with sadness. You shouldn't have gone out in the rain like that. I had to, Elena insisted. I found someone willing to help us. Margaret's gaze softened with motherly concern. Who? Elena hesitated. A man. His name is Noah Blackwood. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. A strange look passed over her face, one that Elena couldn't quite place. It was almost as if she recognized the name. But before Elena could ask, her mother closed her eyes again, exhaustion overtaking her frail body. Elena sighed, leaning back against the chair. She hadn't slept in over 24 hours, and fatigue was catching up to her. She had no idea that, at that very moment, Noah Blackwood's team was already uncovering everything about her. Noah sat at his desk, reading the report his assistant had just handed him. Name, Elena Carter. Age, 18. Family, Margaret Carter. Mother, critically ill. Residence, small apartment in Brooklyn. Financial status, below poverty line. He tapped his fingers against the polished wood, deep in thought. The name Carter rang a distant bell in his mind, but he couldn't quite place it. Sir, Daniel interrupted, clearing his throat. What would you like to do with this information? Noah didn't answer immediately. He didn't usually involve himself in personal matters. His life was built on logic, power, and control. Emotions had no place in his world. And yet, something about that girl haunted him. Arrange a meeting, he finally said. Daniel looked surprised. With the girl? Noah's jaw tightened. Yes. Daniel nodded. Under what pretense? A slow, calculating smile touched Noah's lips. An offer she can't refuse. Elena barely had time to process the events of the past 24 hours when she received an unexpected phone call. Miss Carter? A formal voice said on the other end. Yes, she answered cautiously. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Blackwood. He would like to meet with you. Elena's breath hitched. Noah Blackwood? Yes, ma'am. He has a proposition for you. Elena's heart pounded. A proposition? Why would a billionaire CEO want anything to do with her after helping her once? Still, she had no choice but to find out. Where? She asked hesitantly. The Blackwood Tower. Tomorrow at noon. Elena swallowed hard. The Blackwood Tower was one of the most powerful corporate buildings in the country. What could he possibly want from her? Little did she know, her life was about to change forever. Elena stood in front of the towering Blackwood Tower, her heart pounding in her chest. The massive glass skyscraper loomed above her, a symbol of wealth and power, two things she had never known. Swallowing her nerves, she stepped inside. The luxurious interior, lined with marble floors and chandeliers, was overwhelming. Everyone she passed was dressed in expensive suits, their gazes sharp and calculating. She felt completely out of place. "Miss Carter," a voice called. She turned to see a sharply dressed man with a professional smile. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. Please follow me." Elena nodded, gripping the straps of her worn-out bag as she followed him into an elevator. The ride up felt endless, her thoughts racing with possibilities. Finally, the doors opened to reveal an opulent office with floor-to-ceiling windows. And standing there, gazing out at the city, was Noah Blackwood himself. He turned as she stepped inside, his gray eyes unreadable. "You came," he said simply. Elena swallowed. "I didn't have much of a choice." A ghost of a smirk touched his lips. "Sit." She hesitated before lowering herself onto the leather chair across from his desk. "You're probably wondering why you're here," Noah said, leaning forward, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. She nodded. "I don't do charity," he stated bluntly. "I helped you that night, but I don't believe in giving something for nothing. I want to make you an offer." Elena frowned. "An offer?" He studied her for a moment before sliding a contract across the desk. "I want you to work for me," he said, "as my personal assistant." Elena's eyes widened. "Your assistant? But I don't have any experience." "I don't care," he interrupted. "You're desperate, and I need someone I can trust to handle personal matters." She stared at him in confusion. "Why me?" Noah's jaw tightened slightly. "Let's just say, you remind me of someone." There was something in his voice, something almost vulnerable, but it vanished in an instant. Elena looked down at the contract. The salary was more money than she had ever dreamed of. Enough to take care of her mother and rebuild their lives. But working for a man like Noah Blackwood? A man who was cold, powerful, and unreadable? Could she do it? Taking a deep breath, she picked up the pen. "I accept." Noah's lips curled slightly. "Good. Welcome to Blackwood Enterprises." Days turned into weeks. Elena adjusted to her new role, though working under Noah Blackwood was anything but easy. He was demanding, relentless, and emotionally closed off. But as time passed, she began to see glimpses of something deeper beneath his cold exterior. The way he always checked on her mother's condition, though he never spoke of it. The rare moments when his guard slipped, revealing a man haunted by something in his past. And most of all, the way his gaze softened when he looked at her, though he never admitted it. One evening, as she was organizing documents in his office, she found an old photograph tucked away in a drawer. It was of a young boy, no older than 10, standing beside a woman who looked strikingly familiar. Her mother. Elena's breath caught. Why did Noah Blackwood have a picture of her mother? Heart pounding, she turned to find him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You weren't supposed to see that," he murmured. Elena clutched the photograph. "Noah, what is this?" He exhaled slowly, stepping closer. "Your mother," he said quietly, "was the only person who was ever kind to me when I was a child." Elena's eyes widened. "I grew up in an abusive home," Noah admitted, his voice low. "My father was ruthless. My mother was gone. But your mother, Margaret, she was a neighbor. She used to sneak me food when I was starving. Bandaged me up when I was hurt." Elena's breath hitched as realization dawned. "That's why you helped me," she whispered. Noah held her gaze. "At first, yes." His voice softened. "But now, it's more than that." The air between them grew heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. Elena's heart pounded. She had spent weeks fighting the growing feelings inside her, convincing herself that a man like Noah Blackwood could never care for someone like her. But now, he stepped closer, his fingers brushing her cheek. "You changed me, Elena," he murmured. "In ways I didn't think were possible." Tears welled in her eyes. "You saved me first," she whispered. Noah smiled, a rare, genuine smile, as he leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers. "I think," he said softly, "we saved each other." And for the first time in his life, Noah Blackwood let love in.